everyone. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the article Learning Artistic Creativity, a Case Study by Patricia James. So it was published in 1997 in Studies in Art Education. And essentially, the article is just as the title says. So it's focusing on a specific case study, and the overall purpose is to see how students can learn artistic creativity, particularly in a college classroom. So the particular case study follows one student who is a non-art major, and she enrolls in a Sculpture 1 course, and she's never taken studio courses before, and the course can also be sort of what I think is a gen ed requirement, so that's sort of how it's functioning for her. So she doesn't really have a lot of art knowledge or art experience, but I think that a lot of the students that were in this class are also sort of unexperienced studio students. If they are knowledgeable, only a couple were older, but it specifically focuses on this one student. So Patricia James goes through and discusses how the focus of this actual case study is to see how this student, through her experiences in this course, is able to experience creativity, use creative processes, and also grow as a creative artist or sort of creative individual. So she goes through and is sort of setting up, the research questions. And generally, it's to see how a student with little art knowledge would respond to a classroom context, as I said before. So specifically how instruction, domain knowledge, that's meaning, art domain knowledge, personal knowledge, materials, and social interactions resulted in the solutions that she came up with as like physical art pieces. So those were sort of the artistic solutions, were actual art products. So as she explores the different concepts, they want to see how these different processes and experiences are coming together. So she's examining how all of this comes to play in this particular case study. And so the general goal of this is to gain information about teaching artistic creativity. So, as we talk about creativity, it's a goal for a lot of teachers to inspire their students to be creative. And, how do we inspire creativity? What is inspiring to a student who's maybe in this particular context older and doesn't have a lot of knowledge within the field, as a lot of maybe, K through 12 students might be in the same situation. So James goes through and she sort of sets up the framework for the examination of these processes and this case study. So she's actually quotes Howard Gruber as, setting up some different approaches to thinking about creativity. So one way of thinking about creativity is that it's a gift. So something you're born with, it's a special trait, sort of, nothing, you can do to inspire it because it's just who you are innately. Another idea is to deny its existence altogether. So to speak, no one has the special trait. That's not a real thing, that someone is creative or is not creative. And the third way is to actually think about creativity as sort of more holistically. So creativity is a process and the individual experiences in addition to, their thoughts and processes. So they call this the evolving systems approach, and this becomes the framework through which they explore the case study. So the 5 different facets of this approach are basically stating that creative processes evolve. So, your creative process, your process as an individual changes and evolves from your experiences. The creative person uses many ways of knowing and problem solving. So we have different techniques and modes for being creative and making solutions to creative problems. Creative work is social, so context is important, who you know, who you are around, in this particular example, who her peers are. That's part of your social context. The person chooses their working method, so it makes it personal and constructionist. So as you're working, you develop your process. How do you strategize? How do you think about things? How do you, form a step-by-step process for yourself to make these decisions? And then finally, your feelings and social awareness as a maker are an essential part of creativity. So it is inherently personal, your feelings. So, so to speak, that could be also your aesthetic, things of that nature based on your knowledge and your experiences come together to help form this idea. So the student, they call her Sarah in the study, she goes through this Sculpture 1 course, and essentially it's set up like most Sculpture 1 courses where she has 3 sort of like units, and each of these units culminates in producing one art piece. So the first unit is a found object sculpture, and in this example, so basically James goes through and tells sort of the different things and different experiences that happened to this student during this class. So she gained this information by doing observation and also interviews with the student, but nothing about the actual course structure was changed for the purpose of this case study. So this is something that this teacher has done many other times because they're a seasoned professor. So as a part of, making this found object sculpture, in the first week, she's struggling to sort of let go of found objects as having function and struggling to sort of find them as form. She ends up creating an art piece that is, sort of rather kitsch or trite, cliche. It sort of looks like a sun. It's sort of like, two-dimensional. And the professor sort of criticizes it, saying that, she's doing some interesting things, but also it looks like something that could appear in a gift shop. And through this critique, the student actually acknowledges that that was really true, and she sort of knew that that was true, and sets upon, coming up with a more creative, complex solution for her second piece. So, as it goes through, her pieces do become more thoughtful, more exploratory. She learns to work with materials. And then I sort of made a list of, different specific experiences that she has that I think contribute to those 5 frameworks that I previously mentioned. So Sarah, that she looks at examples of artworks presented from the professor. She sees teacher demonstrations with materials. She experiences with materials and processes herself. There's observation of her peers' processes, so she just walks around the room, sees what other people are doing. She critiques her own work, critiques her peers' work, and sees how they are critiquing one another's work. And through all of this, she's exposed to new ways of looking at and talking about work. So the study provides an example of a student's complex learning process and growth and creativity. And so by the end of it, she's able to really make a sculpture that her peers seem to be very proud of, her professor seems to be very proud of, and she can be very proud of because she sort of, learns a lot throughout this semester and is able to come up with something that was actually more creative than her first project, sort of, literally, and then as it applies to these other sort of working facets of creative thinking and processes. So essentially, through her experience, she experienced sort of this duality between structure and unstructured working. So just as we do in studio courses, you have structured, critique, different things that you're doing and experiencing, and then there's unstructured working, experimenting, working on your own. And so this duality actually reflects the systemic approach to creativity that James sets up as a framework for this study. So I thought that that was a really effective way to break down how this case study demonstrates this idea. So I thought that James, the author, does a really effective job of demonstrating how creativity is enacting in this case. So as I said, the author's perspective, too, is one of an artist and art educator. So they have a lot of knowledge. So I thought that was really interesting, having her perspective on sort of this thing that, we are also all privileged to know about. But from the case of this student, she was coming into the context from a very different situation. So essentially, the author goes through and is able to sort of categorize the ways that those different experiences, like looking at artwork, fit into the framework, which is multiple ways of knowing, social interactions, constructed knowledge, personal meaning, etc. So a lot of her experiences were very easily categorized into that. So I think generally the article provided a really effective look into a very specific situation. And for myself, having come from a studio degree, actually a sculpture degree, I can actually relate to the things that Sarah was experiencing in her coursework. And I think for young students that are in college, they have I had a very similar experience to this. I didn't always understand, exactly all of these things or exactly how this creative process was coming into fruition through my coursework. But I think that she broke it down in a way that is very effective and very useful for our educators to use when creating curriculum. So sorry I went a little over time. Thanks.